On today's episode, guest host Keith Cowing, lecturer at Cornell Tech, and guest Dan Van Tran, Chief Technology Officer at Collectors, explore how transformation can lead to positive personal and organizational change. Keith and Dan discuss how transformation can drive technological growth, improve your decision-making, make you more adaptable, agile, and a stronger and more empathetic leader. We go deep in this episode, so get ready to transform the way you and your team do business. And be sure to check out the episode notes on how to join Keith and Dan in New York City in 2024 for Cornell's Product and Tech Leadership Program. This is something you won't want to miss, so enjoy the episode and thank you for listening.
Our guest today on Cornell Keynotes is Dan Van Tran. Dan is Chief Technology Officer at Collectors, and he was previously a Senior Director of Engineering at Flatiron Health, and he started his career as an engineer at FactSet in the financial services industry. Dan, welcome to Cornell Keynotes.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for having me.
Awesome to have you here. Now, the context for our conversation today is transformation. We're going through a series of unprecedented changes. The pandemic transformed how we think about the office. The market and the Silicon Valley Bank crisis transformed our budgets. And now AI is transforming how we work. And you've been through a lot of transformation in your career, both personally and professionally, and through some of the large organizations that you've run. Right now at Collectors, you have 160 product and engineering people in your technical organization. Why don't we start there and jump right in? Transformation is hard. Change is hard and it's messy. And there's a lot that people can learn from you, from some of the experiences you've been through. Tell me a little bit about where Collectors is today and where it started and the transformation that you've been through there.
Sure. So to familiarize the audience, Collectors' primary business is authenticating and grading collectibles, including trading cards, coins, and video games. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of demand for collectibles, especially trading cards. Sports leagues were being shut down, people were quarantined, and they had a lot of money to burn, which was the perfect mix of factors for the trading card market to thrive. At that point, the collectibles market went from around $370 billion in 2021 to $458 billion in 2022, over a 20% increase in just 1 year, massive for any industry. Collectors itself saw such a massive increase in business that on a single day in March 2021, we received 660,000 cards. It actually shut down the local USPS in Southern California, and we had to rent school buses to go and pick them up with armed guards and everything. It was great for business, but unfortunately, we could only grade around 22,000 cards a day, so we quickly fell behind. We were seeing almost 100,000 come in a day on average. So there were two main transformations that we decided needed to happen. Operational efficiency, which is the pure processing of those cards, and then also the acceleration through technology, using technology to automate steps and reduce the complexity to make those steps easier. I came into this situation unofficially in January to help assess what we could do from a technology perspective. And then I started officially in April of 2021 to help solve the problem full time. Nat Turner, our CEO, he led an acquisition of the company earlier that year for $850 million. And our goal was to turn it from a public company to a private one so that we could rebuild the technology and the operational processes. By that time, we had over 13 million cards in the backlog. So even if we had stopped taking in new orders and submissions, it would have taken years just to process and grade what was in that backlog. Unfortunately, at that time, there were only 21 engineers in the tech team. 12 or so were software engineers. To support the company that had, at that point, reached 750 people. This team of 21 engineers, they managed over 300 web domains, a dozen mobile apps, dozens of internal applications and platforms. It was incredible. There was no product team at that time, translating business requirements into products and services, no information security team, no data team. Everyone was essentially flying blind and doing the best that they could. And this is a company that was 35, 36 years old. And so they had a lot of debt in various ways, a lot of organizational processes, a lot of process to improve. So I knew that I had to scale the team. In order to do so, I focused on the foundations of transformation: people, processes, and tools. So in terms of people, I invested more in people success, structured the business based on the ideal structure that I saw for what we would look like in 5 years. I formed new departments, created a new career ladder to show people what's expected at each level and what they need to do to get promoted, added clarity of a mission and impact. Also created a structured interview process so we could make sure that we attracted the right high impact technologists and innovators to join what was a relatively well unknown company. And so that would help then to build up the people. Once you have that, we could then focus more on processes, building.
Let's pause on the people for a second. Managing and leading a large organization of high talent people is hard. It's messy. You just rattled off a whole bunch of things as if you just wrote it down on a piece of paper and then it happened. And I'm sure it was way more complicated than that. So what was the hardest part as a leader, other people listening to this, taking notes about how they can change their teams in 2024? What was the hardest part about managing this transformation?
The hardest part of coming into a lot of these situations is that imagine you were one of the people that was part of that acquisition of the acquired company. You have this new group of people who think that they can come in and just disrupt things, change things, get you to do something better than what you were already doing. To a degree, the reason why we acquired the company was they were already successful. And so from the perspective of the people on the ground, they were doing something well. Everything was going well. But from the outside perspective, we saw an opportunity to be even better. So a large challenge that I had was to try to show them that vision, to help them to understand, look, we're not trying to tell you that the way that you were doing things in the past was wrong. It's just that you are now hitting a ceiling, and we see a way for you to break that ceiling and achieve even greater results. And it's not going to take much change in terms of what you are doing or what skills you have. It really is just more of a mentality change, a shift in what we're aiming for and how we do things to be more efficient, to aim higher. And so that was one of the hardest challenges that I had. That's why I focused on people first.
And how long did it take to shift that mentality? And can you walk us through some of the specific tactics? Are you sending emails? Are you having all hands? Are you recording videos?
It took a while. There were a lot of small gaps. And especially, for example, one of the challenges that I had to solve was everyone was essentially at the same career level. They were given similar titles, similar levels, even though when I started talking to them, I realized they had vastly different jobs, vastly different tenures. They probably should be at different levels. So I worked on creating a career ladder and then placing everyone on this ladder. That meant that some people had to be essentially demoted. A certain title change would happen and it felt like a demotion. And I had to figure out how do I navigate that without losing the talent. And then once we have that structure, I could then organize them toward different goals. Just, okay, you are now in charge of the architecture. You're more in charge of the implementation. But overcoming that challenge was one of the steps. So this went over many months. But I do think that within the first 6 months, we had enough traction where we were then starting to hire externally and building a lot of that future vision.
Talk to me about balancing that institutional knowledge that's there that's going to carry you through and completely rewiring how the company operates.
When you come into that situation, you have this talent. You definitely don't want to lose that because you want to leverage all of that knowledge because it's going to be the foundation of which you create the change from. At the same time, many of those people, of course, they're going to want to stick with the way that things were or not really pivot too far away from it. So what I tend to do when I come into those situations is try to figure out what is their appetite for change, how aligned are they with this future vision that I'm imagining. And I'll play through with them. Okay, so here are some thoughts that I have. What do you think? Like, this sound good, sound bad? And pretty much in every situation I've been in, you have people in all sides. People who are fully aligned right away and they want to know what they can do. That's your easy case. And then on the complete opposite end, you have the people who are completely off board. They don't want to do anything other than what they're doing. They will tell you what you need to know, but they're not going to contribute in any way toward the new thing. And if you move them to the new thing, they will leave. So what I do after I assess the individuals is then determine, okay, how important is it for them to stay on board? And that's a very tough question. But as a leader, you need to understand that not everyone has to come with you on that journey. You need some of those people to help guide you and shepherd you through specific areas. But if you don't have a good fit, it's just like being in a bad relationship. Don't force it. Let that person go. It's actually not a very caring thing to do to keep them in that situation, because it's probably not good for you. It's not good for their career. It's important then to figure out what is the balance we need in order to, okay, let's put you on like a 2-month retention or something else, but like find the path for them to go do something that they actually can do or love or whatever. In some cases, you can evolve a role specifically for them where they can continue doing that thing because it's important to the company. And even though it's the old thing, it's fine. Like they maintain it. Everything's fine. Everyone else builds some new things. Everyone's happy. In some cases, it may be that you need them to really just have a timeline of, okay, we're going to have to manage you out over a period of time. Here's the deal. Like in order for you to get this package, you need to actually offload this knowledge. Many people are happy with that. But that's generally your hardest cases. For the most part, you will find individuals across all parts of this. And so you can then start to put together, what's our plan for this transition? Who does what? Who's on board? And what do I need to do in order to maintain the key parts of this team so that we can transform the company as a whole? And at Flatiron, I did that pretty successfully. And it always comes down to, it's not, of course, I'm just a small part of it. The large part of it is actually the individuals themselves. Like they are the keys to make that happen. And so it's very important that, they had a huge role in that. But at Flatiron, most of them stayed on board. I don't think we lost many at all. But it was because they had such good attitudes, especially once we started building that bridge between the old guard and the new grads into how they can help each other out. With collectors, it was a bit different because the caliber of the engineering at Flatiron was a bit more consistent for that one old guard organization. At collectors, it was all over the place. They didn't really have a good interviewing process. And so the people and talent they brought in, they were good at the one job that they were hired for. But when you start thinking about transformation, you need people to adapt to different jobs, different roles. A lot of these individuals couldn't do so. And so I had to make hard calls along the way as well as to whether or not we should retain these people, how they could be helpful. And then when I knew that there was no path forward with them, I immediately had the hard conversation to let them know, give them time to think about it, work out a plan with them. And where possible, we would help them by writing resumes, hooking them up with recruiters, like doing whatever we can so that they have a soft landing to their next role. And it honestly is an upgrade for them because now they'll be doing something that's a good fit for them and their aspirations. And then we can replace them with someone who's a good fit for our aspirations. But that part is generally the hard part that a lot of leaders run into for these sorts of transformations.
And going through that change, there are a lot of people that are hammers that have little sensitivity and will slice and dice and be extremely decisive. And then there are people that are huggers that want to hold on to everybody. And that doesn't work either. You're describing a strong but challenging middle ground where you're strong, opinionated, yet compassionate and empathetic leadership, which sounds really hard. And is this something you've learned overnight that you were just naturally good at or something that you've worked at over a long period of time?
The adaptability is definitely, I think, key to all of it. A lot of it I learned because my parents actually are Buddhist, funny enough. And so the reason why that's important is because Buddhism is all about the middle ground. It's all about the middle way, figuring out the balance between everything. And so throughout life, they always taught me to think of things in the balanced way, to consider all sides. And of course, as a kid, that's very difficult. But as I started thinking about it and as I grew older, I saw all the opportunities to really apply that. And what I saw, especially in the work context, is that being adaptable is key. I explain all these things, they are all just tools in your toolbox. They won't work necessarily for you. The things that worked for me in my situation, you might try to apply to yours and it might explode. The important thing is to fail fast and iterate, but to get that feedback and to realize, okay, in this situation, this is what's happening. In some cases, you may have to be a tree hugger. Those resources are way too expensive and to lose, and you need to keep them around. And so you play the tree hugger for a little while. In other cases, you have to start over. We've had cases of that in collectors as well. Entire departments being demolished and started again from scratch. It's just because the fit isn't there. It's a hard thing, but I think you need to take each case by case and find that middle ground.
I love how you outline people and then process and then tools. So people is not easy, something everybody who's leading has to deal with. Now, how about process? Walk us through some of that.
Yeah, for processes, so I mentioned a little bit about some of this career development. one of the things that people weren't getting was a lot of good feedback around what they were doing. Was it good? Was it bad? And especially from the product side of things, they were developing things in a room of engineers without any product managers, without any designers, without often talking to the stakeholders directly, just kind of anticipating what they may need, building it, and then later on finding out, oh, it doesn't quite fit the solution for the problem that they're aiming for. So they'd have to go back to drawing board, figure out, okay, what is the problem? It just took many iterations. I think they were on something like a 6-month release cycle, which for anything outside of old school Microsoft building Windows 95, things like that, like this is just not how modern companies work. So one of the processes that we needed to improve was tighter development loops. And we then now have weekly, bi-weekly releases. We can even get daily in some cases, but things like that, having technical design documents, incident management processes. I remember being in the office when an incident was happening. They didn't even call it an incident, but the system was down. Every minute this particular system was down, we were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in business. And so there was no process, unfortunately, for the team to actually figure out how do we recover from this. It was just a few people in a Zoom meeting making guesses as to what they can do. So I immediately saw the opportunity to start building in more rigor. And at this point, we're still working on it, but it's much, much better. The time to recovery is much better. So focusing on processes was important for this change as well.
Now, incident management is fascinating in that there will be crises, right? No matter what you're doing. And when people are getting ready for 2024, there's a lot of pressure on, let's implement AI. Let's integrate AI into what we're doing, no matter what type of company you are, either into your product or into your team or into how you run. And all of this stuff is fairly new in the way people are using it. Technologies may have been around for a while, but they've hit the zeitgeist now. And so people are going to have to take risks by using things that they're not comfortable with, that are changing rapidly, that they haven't done in the past. How do you think about guiding folks that are trying to transform themselves or their team or their organization around risk management? Where do you be bold and just go for it? Where do you need to be really careful? And how do you balance how often you're right versus, hey, we might be wrong some of the times, but we're just going to have really good detection if something goes wrong and we'll fix it quickly?
It's a good question. The thing that AI and machine learning and all of these amazing technologies help us to do is accelerate or potentially explore different solutions. But the overall process stays the same. It's still, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What does success look like? What's the outcome we're looking for? AI and ML are just tools on how to get there. There are other options, being manual, scrappy, etc. This has always been the case. You could always, back in the day, do things without a database. You could use an Excel sheet. You can use Post-it notes. And in a lot of times, especially when starting a new business, that makes sense. You don't have to go all out and have a fully, relational database accounting for all of your information. Same thing with AI and ML. I think it starts a lot with what's the goal that we're striving for? What are the KPIs? And then based on that, what risks are we willing to take, or what level of success do we need to achieve? And constantly monitoring that. Because then you can take risks in certain areas without jeopardizing the final outcome, and you can experiment.
One of the themes that you hear throughout this is there's a lot of things that can get in the way when you're trying to transform. Transformation is hard, and there's people, there's process, there's tools, there's all of these things that you want to point in the right direction. And a lot of times they're not pointed in the right direction at the beginning, and you got to shift them. So for leaders or even individual contributors that are leading efforts within companies that are trying to get change in their favor in 2024, and they're looking at things that are in their way. Maybe their boss is not as decisive as they would like. Maybe there's technical debt that gets in the way. Maybe there's cultural debt that gets in the way. How do you advise people to take on these hurdles within an organization that slows down change and turn them and point them in the right direction so that they can be successful?
We run into this every day, even in successful, continuously changing organizations, but especially in ones that are in need of transformation. Most of the big decisions that need to happen in organizations, it comes down to alignment, making sure that you have people on board for your decisions. So I would say that the biggest barrier often to change is making sure that everyone understands what the change is, why we're making it, they're bought into it. And a lot of that is similar to thinking about career ladders, thinking about vision, things like that. A lot of it comes down to talking to each individual and helping them to understand this is the reason why this change needs to happen. And so for a lot, especially at the leadership levels, a lot of the people who are in these leadership teams, they are very talented. They have a lot of experience. They have a perspective on what we should do and why. And as a leader, you need to take all these perspectives and bring them into a consolidated view of here's what we need to do and how we're going to do it. And so for each one of them, you have to understand what are their intents? What does success look like for them? And based on that, you can start creating these Venn diagrams. Here is what I feel like is good for the business. Here's what they feel like is good for the business. What's that middle overlapping section that we can use to start in order to start making change happen? Because that will be the low-hanging fruit. That's the part where you make that change. You then buy goodwill with them. Now, for the next set of changes, they've seen how successful those changes were. They'll give you a bit more trust. You can then take a big risk and say, like, hey, I know that this is a bit outside of what you were thinking, or it isn't quite aligned with how you were envisioning things to be, but give me a chance here. I think I've proven myself in the past. Let me show you how this can actually be impactful for us. And by doing that, you slowly, incrementally make change happen and start aligning people to take bigger and bigger risks, bigger and bigger changes. And this framework works not just with the leaders, but with individuals. It works at every layer.
No, humans tend to be self-centered animals. We're worried about ourselves. We're worried about our own preservation. What you described, one key part of that is understanding what success looks like for somebody else and how it can work for them. Put yourself in a new leader's shoes, sitting in a room, trying to get alignment, trying to lead the way. How do they get out of their own way and think about the other people first, which is not a natural instinct? How do you coach people to have that behavior? And what are some of your tactics to make sure you exhibit it?
Yeah, usually in order to fully understand someone else's perspective, it always starts the same way that you would start a new role. It's to listen. There's a lot of listening. Do a lot of listening tours. And a lot of that is really understanding their perspective wholly, not just even from a work perspective, but from a personal perspective, because you have to understand them as a human being. Like decisions are inherently human and they're driven by people. And so you really have to understand all the humans and people involved. And after a certain point, you start to understand more about, okay, so if I were this person, how would I feel if I said X? Or how would I feel if the company made a decision to do Y? And then based on that, you can anticipate how they'll react and then what you can do in order to get them on board. And when you do that, you can then start to form a strategy around, okay, so how do I address all of these people or align all these people in a way where we can do something together? And a lot of it too, maybe just asking the individual in a one-on-one or some other context, hey, so I was thinking about this. How do you feel about that? A lot of times I don't go directly to the, hey, here's a change I want to make for your organization, which I have no control over. What do you think? I start with, hey, here's a change I want to make in my organization, somewhat related to the change I want to make in their organization, but I want to make this change in my organization. How do you feel about it? Like, what advice would you give me? It's not risky for them, and everyone loves giving advice. So you can really get a sense for how they actually think, what their preferences, et cetera, are. And then that gives you information into, okay, now I understand more about what their brain, how it works, how it breaks these problems down. And now I can start to figure out how to align them.
And if you're coaching somebody and you're going to put them in the room and give them an example, you talked about alignment a lot. Put me in the room when you're in a situation, specific one, there was not agreement. You had to get to agreement or at least alignment and come out of there with alignment so it could succeed. What did that look like?
There is a very contentious product that we have within Collectors that is a machine learning derived product. It's called Collectors Estimates. This is a really interesting product because if you think about automobiles, there is a Kelley Blue Book that you can use to determine the value of any vehicle, any age, any condition. But if you go to collectibles, essentially in the collectible world, the more rare, unique an item is, the more valuable it is. But so how do you determine the value that these items should have? What price would you put on the Mona Lisa, right? Things along those lines. When you buy a pack of trading cards, it doesn't come with a price per card. You just buy whatever the dollar amount is for that pack. But once you open up that pack and there are all those cards, how much is each card worth? So we strove to solve that problem using machine learning and using sales data from various auctions and one-on-one private sales, etc. Eventually developed a model that we fed all this data to, and it could predict with a pretty high level of confidence what the value range should be. And initially, this, as you might imagine, was very contentious because for your house, what price would you put on it, right? And this is the constant problem you see in the housing market. People who own the house, they love that house, they've lived in that house, they have a very strong idea of what the house should be worth. A buyer comes in, lowballs them, they get very offended. These things are personal to people. So when we come in and we say, hey, we know what your card is worth, it's between this and this, we had all sorts of emotions rage up. And we started, of course, using our leaders as a lot of the people that we were getting feedback from, as well as some of our VIP customers. And they were very, very enraged in some cases about what values we were giving them, even though scientifically, mathematically, these are correct. This is very accurate. And we could show that with the data. So one of the disagreements we had is, okay, so now that we have this initial feedback, should we continue this project or not? And I was on the camp of, yes, we should continue this project. Just because we're getting some initial negative feedback, it doesn't mean that we need to kill the project, but that we need to iterate, incorporate the feedback, figure out, is this the right sub problem of this to solve? Or is there something else at the step toward eventually getting to a Kelly Blue Book type solution, but that provides some level of value so that the customers are getting some input, especially for new collectors, on what the value should be. But the other users, they don't feel so upset that the value isn't fully correct. In the other camp, you had the people who felt, no, this is just so egregiously wrong, and we will make people so upset that we will lose brand faith. So what we ended up doing was actually laying out a bunch of different options and talking about the pros and cons of different approaches. And we aligned on, well, the overall goal is for us to provide transparency to our customers around the liquidity of their collectibles. And this is a key part of that. So we agree, even if this isn't the solution, something along this line needs to be created. With that in mind, we outlined a few different alternative solutions, even a statistical approach, for example, just doing averages and not showing any values for anything that hasn't been sold before. And we eventually landed on, okay, here is a less aggressive way of displaying a value, because initially we were just displaying one number. And eventually we iterated over to show a range. We still show the number, but we say that this is the collector's estimate, but we show the range more importantly. So that you can see, okay, here's the number, but here's the full large bracket that might fall into. And people were much more comfortable with that. At this point, it's been about a year. And now we have thousands of people, tens of thousands of people using these products every day and actually very happy with it, to the point where we're thinking of using it in almost an automated way in a lot of our products to help people with listings and things like that.
I sense a theme in a lot of the stories you're telling around learning from the environment that you're in, people passing down leadership insights, and then you passing that on and helping other folks when people are taking on in 2024 the biggest leadership challenges of their careers. How do you advise them to go out and get the learning, get the coaching, get the mentoring in order to be successful from people that have seen a bunch of things before?
One of the first things you have to do, of course, is to be very willing to be vulnerable, because you have to first be ready to make whatever change is necessary for you to be better. And a lot of times we're human, myself included. I have a lot of these mental blocks that keep me from really acknowledging this is the problem and I need to change this about myself. But once you overcome that, there are lots of great resources out there. I personally have an executive coach who I love, and they are fantastic at pointing out my flaws to me and actually very quickly letting me know where I should make an adjustment. But I also do two things continuously. I mentor and I get mentored by others. And so I actually reach out at Flatiron. I joined this network called First Round, and they have a great mentorship program called Fast Track. I both mentored and got mentored by some others, but that set off a lot of relationships that then I continue to nurture and continue to be referred to others. And that lets me exercise a lot of my teaching skills, which actually, as a result, helps me practice the skills I use at work as well to mentor others. And then to be mentored, I go through my network and I talk to a lot of people, Keith included, to actually learn a lot from various others who are experts in different ways. And one of the things you have to, again, being very humble about it, like you need to really look at where are my growth areas and find the people who are outstanding in those areas. Keep in touch with them, ask them for some of their time. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to meet with you at no cost just to help you through a problem. There are a lot of groups like the RAND's Leadership Slack. That's a free community that you can join. And there are a lot of great experts there who are more than happy to spend time with you. I've made a lot of great connections there. And even through your friends, family, you'll find that you actually probably know a lot of people who can help you through things that you may not have expected. And so the bigger thing is to really set yourself on that journey. The resources are out there, but I think the biggest first step is to acknowledge I need to change and then figure out what do you want to learn? How do you want to improve?
I'll double down on one comment you made there, which is getting a variety of inputs and perspectives where you need advice on the exact thing you're doing, your function, your problem, your team, your industry. But also some of the most breakthrough pieces of advice or insight can come from totally different environments where people don't understand your industry at all, but understand some other component of leadership or operations or things that you can learn from. And some of the best products, some of the best teams, some of the best leadership moments, in my experience, come from connecting dots from completely different parts of your life and your network and the people that you talk to.
Yeah, it's definitely where some of the best ideas come from. It's like the new person who comes in and they point out that thing that's been a problem forever and give you a solution that none of us have thought of. But they're brand new. They have no context, no insight. But that's good ideas can come from anywhere. And so to your point, it's important to farm it out and try to find that diversity of thought because you'll be surprised at what you find.
I can't think of a better note to wrap this conversation on. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Cornell Keynotes.
Thanks. It was great being here.
Thanks for listening. And again, check out the episode notes on how to join Keith and Dan in New York City for Cornell's Product and Tech Leadership Program. Again, this is an event you won't want to miss, and we hope you'll join us at Cornell Tech in 2024.